All of the food we eat and much of the clothing we wear comes from plants and animals that are raised on farms. Farms are different in type, in size, and even in name.
Previously on Barn Talk.
Welcome to Barn Talk. What happens at the barn stays at the barn until Dad and I came along. Now we're just going to let it all out for you guys. So today is a very special episode because today is Tork's birthday. We got a birthday episode, birthday special.
I should have a sombrero.
You should. We need a mariachi band to get in here and start singing. But
free fried ice cream.
While you're doing this, I'm going to go get up and get you something. You give him the market update. All right. I'll be right back.
I'll give him the market update. I'm scared. I'm a little bit scared now. Here's the card.
I don't know. I got kind of heartfelt there. So
am I supposed to read it out loud, or is this for private?
That's for private. I think that's for private. Yeah.
Ah, nice.
And now for part 2.
The production was never great. It was okay, but then we got into 98, and 98 was just an absolute train wreck. And at one point, 98, I was pretty sure that I was going to lose the farm up there, that my wife was going to leave me, and I wasn't sure whether or not my parents, my dad was, by normal standards, my dad was elderly at that point. He wasn't, because he could outwork me, but it was stressful. It was very stressful. And
so 98 was another hog market crash.
And 98 was the wake-up call that this deal wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
So all this, this whole time, I'm the optimist, and I think it's going to work. It's going to work.
Well, it'd be hard not to, just because you did it, and it worked for 2 years, and then you got the wake-up call happen, and then you're like, okay, this was bad, but it's not going to get any worse than that.
Yeah.
And then if you wouldn't have got the 2 years of prosperity of it working, I think it's hard to know though. It's really hard to know. You would have never, but keep going, because there's light at the end of the tunnel here.
So a lot of hard conversations, and a lot of tough. And it wasn't just about money. It was about the two. It was about the two of us dealing with a lot of stress, and not, we were pretty naive. We were pretty naive.
You and Grandpa or Mom? And
all of us.
You, okay.
My parents, my dad was to the point where, he's not going to change. It's too far down the road. What's he going to do? Mm-hmm. And we had Clay, so we had my oldest son in 95, and so we were, we had a family, and we were like, how are we going to feed our, how are we going to feed our family, and how are we going to keep this going? Are we going to lose this? And the only thing that saved the farm really was the fact that we were so small, and I won't tell you the whole story, but the bank that we banked at, I remember going there and fully expecting my banker to tell me that he was going to sell me out. But I honest to God believe this. When I got there, another one of the integrators, one of our local integrators, banked there. And the conversation was very pointed in that office, because when I got there, the shades were drawn, and I was sitting in the lobby, and I could watch the shades move. And it sounded something like a Peanuts movie. You could just hear a little bit of... Only on the other side of that door, that's not what it was. And the door opened, and the customer walked out, which was a guy I knew and had a lot of hogs, was a big producer. And my banker, who always was very well put together, he had his coat off and the top button of his shirt unbuttoned and his tie loosened up. And he looked at me, and he just motioned for me to come in there. And I sat down, and in front of him was my folder with all of my loans and my operating, and it was about It was about a half an inch thick, maybe. Maybe it was an inch thick. And then sitting on the other side of him was this other folder that I could only assume was the guy that was in there. And it was like 8 folders, each one of them full.
Thick.
So he just looks at me and he said, how's it going? And I said, it's not worth a damn. And he said, yeah, tell me about it. And he opens the folder and he looks at it and he says to me, do you think you can pay the interest on this thing until we get, And I just was kind of taken aback and I said, well, I think I can. And he just shut the folder and said, let's just do that. And I think that the whole reason was because my problems compared to the problems of a lot of large established hog producers at that time were nothing.
Yep.
I mean, there was so much money being lost that it wasn't even on the radar. So I went home and
you had a chance. You had some hope.
Yep. And we sat down and we talked about it, and I had to get a job. I mean, I had to do something. My dad obviously wasn't gonna.
So did you come from that bank? So before you went to the bank meeting, did you guys decide we're selling the pigs, we're selling the sows, we're done completely?
No.
Okay.
No. We didn't know. We really didn't know what we were gonna do. And it was just, it was, I don't really remember that much about it. I think it's because it was just bleak and it wasn't very enjoyable and it was just tough. But I came back and I knew that we couldn't keep doing what we were doing.
Yep.
And so somewhere in there, we decided to sell the sows. We did that. And then what we did was we started custom feeding some pigs in the buildings we had for some people, just some guys that were buying pigs and placing them. And that kind of kept my dad afloat, gave him some income. And me too, I had pigs in a nursery and one of the finishers. And
was that what a lot of guys did during that time if they completely lost their ass and they weren't like huge producers?
Yeah. And
I mean, just like, because this is what people don't really realize. Back then, everybody was fair to finish. I mean, if you had pigs, you had the sows, you did exactly what you guys did, and that was just how it was. It was just like owning your own ground. Like you did all the work, and that's what it was. That was like how it was. Now today we're here, and most people, 95% of people, custom feed pigs for an integrator.
Well, and
there are some guys that do a little bit of both, and there's guys that still somehow are raising their own pigs.
Yeah,
but it's very difficult.
Yeah, you're taking a lot of risk.
So this was kind of a defining moment in this hog production space in general. For a lot of people, it was a defining moment, like you, but it was a changing point in hog production.
It was, and we're kind of glossing over. There were so many changes that went. So the genetics changed, but then the other thing that happened during this whole time was when I was a kid, there was probably, through the 80s and into the early 90s, there was probably, I bet you there was probably 10 different places in Washington, the Washington area where we grew up, that were selling feed, that were selling concentrate, that people were grinding their own feed. And by concentrate, what I mean by that is you bought concentrate and it had the bean meal mix. It was the bean meal mixed with the vitamin pack, the calcium, the salt, all that, and it came together. Well, somewhere along the way, premix started. And what premix is people figured out they could buy their own bean meal, and why pay the markup on the bean meal? I could just go to ADM or Cargill in Cedar Rapids and buy my bean meal, and then I could just buy a pack that was literally just the lysine, just basically the vitamin pack. And I could save a bunch of money because I'm not paying this guy markup on bean meal.
Right.
Well, that changed everything. And you had feed mills, local guys that were selling feed. They got decimated because no
one was buying it.
Well, there was a couple of companies that were ahead of the game as far as they were the first ones to really get on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like shooting fish in a barrel because you could show these guys that you could save however many dollars a ton by doing this yourself. And so when this all hit, you had a lot of guys that were farrowing that couldn't make any money, that got rid of their sows. And if they were raising them in barn lots or open fronts or stuff like that, nobody wanted that stuff if you were an integrator. So they literally got completely out of it. And then at the same time, the people that were servicing a lot of this, they had fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer customers, and they weren't making any money because the margin was gone. You had to sell. If I'm buying something and instead of buying, 40 ton of premix or of concentrate every month, I'm buying 2 ton of bags, and the margin on that is not near as good.
Yep.
Whoever's selling it's got to sell a lot more bags.
Right.
And so you saw, I could rattle off all the, Land O'Lakes, Purina, Golden Sun Feed, Mormons, Kent. All these guys. And the consolidation started in that industry because all the margin was getting out
All
of it.
the little guys, you either could consolidate into one or you were not making it.
Yeah. So the ripple effects, it was happening everywhere. And so, by 98, 99, I knew that it wasn't going to work. And so we kept finishing pigs for a couple of guys, but I had to get a job. And we converted our gestation barn to finishing. And the guy that did that was a local guy. Shout out to Craig Jones, owner of the Ace and More in Washington, Iowa. But Craig Jones, he gave me a job when I probably wasn't qualified to do anything other than raise pigs. And he was a guy that he fixed hog buildings, he did remodels, and then he built. He was a one-man shop, and I went to work for him part-time. But I think before I did that, I went to work for a printing factory in Iowa City because I was just looking for a job, something to give me some money to keep food on the table. So I worked third shift at a printing factory in Iowa City, and I did that. I was the last person that got hired. They got a couple of contracts, and they had to hire like 40 people, and then I'd been there 3 months, and they lost a contract, so I was one of the first people that they let go.
Thank God.
Yeah, because, I don't know if I'd still be there today, but it was a lot of fun, but I couldn't have done it forever,
right? Working
third shift. So anyway, when I lost that, I went to work for Craig. And what I did for him is I worked on a 5-man. I think there was 5 of us, and then there was 4 of us, and sometimes there was just 2 of us. And I learned by doing. I literally learned by doing. So the beautiful thing about what he did was he did everything. So he didn't do the concrete, but we did do a lot of concrete work. But he framed the building, he wired the building, he put all the equipment in, and then he serviced it. And it was all the same crew that did everything. And so I learned from the ground up how you run the wire, how you wire the motors, how you wire the fans, how you set up the control. And then he did all of his own service work, and he was getting busy. It was a time when the integrators were coming in, and
the big guys
started to get bigger. So when I say big guys, we had 240 sows. Well, there were some guys around that had 1,200 sows. And those guys, some of them didn't make it, but some of them did, and some of them, they doubled.
Yeah,
they went to 2,400. And then to grow, it's really hard to grow if you're going to farrow all the pigs and then you're going to build all the space to finish those pigs. And that's where the contract finishing idea was born, because it enabled them to spend their money building sows.
The sow part of it.
And they basically hired people like me, like us, to build the finisher
for them. Take care of their pigs.
And they were fine guaranteeing you the money to do it. They just couldn't carry all that debt on their balance sheet, because if I build the building, that's debt, and that's long-term debt. But if I'm the guy and I'm renting the building, that building payment that I'm giving them every month, that's just a short-term liability. And so if you're borrowing money and if you're doing a cash flow, you can make it work better.
if you're not taking on all the debt.
If you're not taking on all that debt. And so that business really started to grow, building buildings. And so Craig, he was busy. And
so if people don't know what the word what integrator means, integrator is the big guys that got more sows and they started doing the custom feeding. And now today there's a handful of custom pig feed operations called integrators. They got the hogs, they go to farmers and they contract basically what we're doing.
Yeah. So we contract feed for Eichelberger Farms out of Wayland, Iowa, and that's a family owned business that they've got a lot of sows and they got their own feed mill, and then they have people toll mill for them, but they own a few finishers themselves, but the vast majority of the finishing space they have are independent people like me, and they pay us, basically rent the building, provide the feed, provide the veterinary supply. We provide the labor, we provide the utilities, and it's a relationship where it gives me the fertilizer, it gives me something to do that pays me a wage.
Passive income.
Yep, exactly. So it's been a good deal.
And it's, like I said before, it's really what like 95% of people do it, because it's really hard to grow. If you wanted to, you couldn't just start farrowing sows, and you couldn't.
I always said that if you so you can do it, and there's guys that have shares in sow units, and there's guys that own small sow units. Like there's guys that own a 1,200 head sow unit, and then they finish all their own pigs, and they farm enough ground there, so you can make it work. If you farm enough ground that you've got the grain, and you want to run that grain through that pig operation, and basically add value to your crop. If you can manage the labor and get people to work for you, and you can manage the swings in the price and the ups and downs of the price you're receiving for the pork, for the hogs, you can make it work. But it gets harder.
Cost of entry.
I always tell people that if you woke up and you won the lottery and you had $300 million, or you had to have $500 million, and you said, I'm just going to be the biggest hog producer, and I'm going to go build all this from scratch, you would give up long before you ever got very far, because there's so many moving parts, and it's the people side of it. It's like any large business. It's the people side of it. You have to find good people at so many levels that can do it, because you cannot do it all yourself, that you'll probably give up before you ever.
It's a hard business.
It is. It's a tough business. It really is. And
it's not, the other thing is, it's not just human lives that you're affecting. It's
right. Yeah. So it's different than making widgets, in the fact that, if you need to shut down the Ford plant for 2 weeks, you lose money, but nobody dies. Somebody has to be at every one of those sow units, every one of those nurseries, every one of those finishers every day,
because
multiple times a day. And if an alarm goes off because a fan quits or something happens, the water quits, somebody has to take care of that.
And lives are at stake.
Yep. Absolutely.
So you're not just taking care of people, you're taking care of pigs too.
Yeah. It's a little different than making widgets, for sure.
Right.
Anyway, I got a little bit ahead of myself. So when I went to work for Craig,
you did everything. You fired it up. You did all of it.
We did all of it. And then he did all of his own service. And as he got busier, he needed somebody to fix stuff. And I honestly didn't know that much about fixing, other than my dad instilled in me this idea that if it was broke, you figured out how to fix it rather than call somebody, because you didn't want to spend the money. And so I was stubborn enough that when it came to like electrical, I would fumble my way through it and try to figure out. And Craig was the same way. That was what we had in common, and I think that's what I always admired about him, was he taught me a lot, but the most important thing that he taught me was, I always said that Craig is the guy that if he answered the phone, we never knew what the person was asking him on the other end of the phone, but it didn't matter, because his answer was always the same. It'd be like, yep, sure. Oh yeah, we can do that. And then he'd hang up the phone and say, any of you guys know how to weld depleted uranium? Or, fill in the blank, whatever it was. Right. And we all be like looking at each other, and he'd be like, well, we're going to go do this, or we're going to go do that, because he was trying to provide for his family.
What do you always say?
Fake it till you make it?
Nope.
I say a lot of things. What?
Trial and error.
Oh, yeah. Right. And that's what I did.
Will get you a long way.
Trial and error will get you a long ways, and you learn from your mistakes. And so, I had a pair of wire pliers. Craig gave me, like a pair of wire pliers and a tester and I don't know what all. And I don't know how many pairs of wire pliers I welded, learning what not to touch at the same time and all that. But anyway, I learned a lot, and I progressed and got better at it. And while I was doing this, Sawyer was born. So this is in 2000. Sawyer was born in February 2000, and I was still working for Craig. And I was making, I think I was probably making $12 an hour, and then I got a raise, and I was making like $14 an hour. And I mean, we were getting by, but it was,
And the farm was still.
So
would you go work and then come back and check on the pigs?
Mm-hmm. So I'd work for him, and then, come back and chore and haul manure on the weekend, power wash on the weekend. I just worked all the time.
Hustling.
Which was what we had to do, but our marriage took a toll. I mean, it did take a toll. Trish and I wasn't around a lot, and she was working full time. She was cutting hair. She had a salon there in her house, and raised the kids and made up for me working all the time. And we got by, but it was tough. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that this wasn't my I couldn't do this forever. I couldn't just work on a crew forever, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. And
what was when you first started working for Craig and all, I mean, what was your main goal of all of what you were trying to do?
Provide for my family and buy myself enough time to figure out what I was going to do. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And so for about a year and a half.
Did you think, like, whether it be the farming or not, were you kind of like, if we can make the farming work, we'll do the farming, but if we can't, we can't?
Yeah. And so right during this time, we had a neighbor that I rented their farm. I rented their farm. It was 240 acres, and I crop rented it from them. And this was in 99 probably. And we were LDP in corn. So I used my dad's equipment and didn't pay anything for the equipment, and farmed this and swapped it for labor, and farmed that for 3 years, I think, and didn't make any money. I mean, broke even basically, but didn't make any money. Just juggled a lot of money around. And then they actually decided that they were going to sell that farm. And so we weren't going to continue to rent it, and they wanted to know if I wanted to buy it, and I didn't have any money. So I got into grain farming, and then I got out of grain farming, and I didn't really have anything to show for it. So I was kind of about as low on farming as I'd ever been. And this is where I think I think I really lost that optimism, and I never really thought about building a hog building to custom feed. I was really kind of down on the hog business.
You had a sour taste in your mouth.
Yeah, I just didn't, and I didn't know what I wanted to do.
I mean, how could you? I'm sure that there was a lot of guys like that, though.
Well, yeah, and Trish, I guarantee at that point, if I would have said, the way to do, what we need to do is double down, and we need to go and tear these hog buildings down here at home and put up a couple of finishers, I think she would have left me. Or she would have taken me and tried to get me professional help, because she would have thought I was crazy.
Right.
And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But out of the blue, one day in the fall of 2000, we were setting trusses on a hog building down by Wayland, Iowa. It was actually Matt Lichty's building. We were setting trusses on Matt Lichty's building, and I get a phone call, and it is Chris Harmison, and he is the
CEO.
No, he ran the business for Claude. He was the office man. I don't know what you want to say he did. He managed the contractors and all the employees for PSI. And he called me and asked me whether or not I would like to talk about a position. And the funny thing about it was that day at lunch, we had talked about the guy that had been running all the crews that did all the install for Precision Structures out of Wellman, Iowa. And in this area where we grew up, they were the king builder. I mean, as far as hog buildings go, they built the vast majority of them. Mm-hmm. And Craig, my boss, at lunch that day had said, "Did you hear that this guy is leaving PSI?" And he had a reputation. This guy had a reputation. He was a hard-nosed guy. He was really good at what he did, but he went through employees pretty fast, and he was very abrasive, let's just say that. He had a reputation. And I was like, I remember I made the comment, I said, "Holy cow." I said, "What are they going to do? Who are they going to find to replace him?" And Craig's like, "I don't have any idea." And 2 hours later, my phone rings, and it's Chris Harmison, and he wants to talk to me about a position. And I said to him, I'm like, "Well, I'm on a roof right now," but I said, "Yeah, I would be." And we set it up. I think this was on like a Monday. I think this was on a Monday. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "When can you do it?" And he wanted to know if I could do it tomorrow. And I was like, "Holy cow." I said, "Okay, I can't do it tomorrow, but I could do it Wednesday." And so I get off the phone and finish that day. And I told Craig, I said, I got to take Wednesday afternoon off. And we were busy, and Craig didn't like that. But I just felt like I had to go. And so I went, and that was the beginning of PSI for me. And I sat down with them, and they were looking for somebody to replace this guy that had left. And I've told this story, but this is probably one of the most pivotal moments as far as from the trajectory that I was on to the trajectory that I ended up on. That was one of those times that when you look backwards, and that's one of the great things about getting older is you have hindsight. I mean, they call it wisdom, but it's really just you have the life experience that you can look backwards, and you know when you made a change, and you know what that looks like. And so it helps you look forward a little bit. But anyway, I was sitting in that office, and they were looking for somebody to manage the service side and the install side of their business and basically fire up all the buildings they built and make sure that everything was done right. And I was way over my head because the controls that they used were not the same that Craig installed. I had done a lot of maintenance, but I hadn't worked on hardly any of the brands of stuff that they were using. And plus I had worked on probably building maybe 8 or 9 sheds, and they built at that time, they probably built 25 or 30 sheds a year. And so I felt like it was just like going from nothing to the big leagues.
Yep.
And, they asked me this and asked me that, but I'll never forget, Claude Greiner owned that company, and he sat there, and he didn't say much. There were 3, I think there was 2 other people in there. There was an estimator, and then there was Chris. And I think Claude's son, Adam, was in there too. He was one of the estimators. And they asked me different questions about different stuff. Nothing really hard. But Claude finally looks at me and he says, "So I've got this finisher that we're just finishing up, and I'm going to send you out there to fire it up. How do you do that?" Which, I have no idea. But the one thing that I read about Claude was I knew he was a salesman, and I knew that he probably didn't have any idea how it got set up either, because that wasn't his deal. He was the big picture guy. And I just looked him right in the eye and I said, "Claude, however you want it done." And he slapped either Chris or Adam on the shoulder, and he goes, "That's a damn good answer. That's a good answer." And I left that interview and I felt pretty good. And that night I got home, and Chris called me and he said, "I'd like to offer you a position at PSI." I said, I would be interested in that. And he said, "There's one problem. You got to start by Friday." And this was Wednesday. And I've always felt bad about this because
he's the one that gave you a chance, Greg.
Yeah. And I went to work that next day, and I went late. I told him I was going to be late because I wanted to get there after the crew had left. And I told him, I said, "You remember we were talking about, Randy Berg, and we didn't know what crazy person was going to take that job. And I didn't say it like that. I said it a little more colorfully. He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm the crazy son of a bitch that's going to take that job. And I could tell he was pissed. And I told him that he could take the vacation days that I had, but I wasn't going to be able to. I got to start Friday, and I can't give you my 2 weeks and all that. And he took it pretty well. He was pissed. I think his wife was a lot more upset than he was, and but he knew it was an opportunity, and in the end, it worked good, and I consider him a good friend of mine now. I mean, he's a great guy. But anyway, I left there and I went to PSI, and that was a turning point because when I went there, I really found my calling, I guess you'd say, because all of the things that had happened to me and all the time that I spent building buildings and working in buildings and growing up with my dad, figuring you're going to have to figure it out. That's what happened. And I remember I picked up the truck on Friday afternoon, and at that time we didn't have cell phones, so you had a pager. Mm-hmm. And every building we built had this pager number in it, and it said Randy. Now it was Tork. But anyway, they would page you, and then you'd call them back, and then they tell you what you needed. And I picked that truck up on Friday afternoon, and on Saturday morning, somebody called me, and I went to Lost Nation, Iowa, which is, I don't know, it's probably like 2.5 hours away. And I had to fix a curtain machine, and it was a curtain machine, hired hand curtain machine that I'd never worked on before. And so instead of dropping the motor and spinning the screw out of it and changing the bushing in about 20 minutes, I didn't know how to do it. So I took the whole top of the curtain machine off, vice gripped the cables, and cranked the screw by hand, and it ended up taking me like 2 hours. But I did get it done. And the beautiful thing about it was at that time, you brought your tickets in on Monday morning, and Tammy, the bookkeeper, she'd cut you a check by Monday afternoon. And I got a pretty healthy raise from what I was getting paid. And then the other thing was, and this is something that today I just think it's weird because people don't want to work like they did. So in my mind, I was broke. I mean, in my mind, I was living paycheck to paycheck. And that job, you could work as much as you wanted to work because there was no end to the stuff that needed fixed. They had so many buildings out there and so many buildings going up that nobody ever even questioned the hours you worked. And it was almost all billable because it was almost all service or else it was fire up on new buildings. And so literally, if I didn't have a service call I had to make, there was a building out there that was getting finished that I needed to go check the water, check all the fittings, check the control, set the control, do all that. And I got paid every week. And so I had 2 small children and a wife and, bills to pay and mouths to feed. But I knew that was the first time since 1996 or 7 where I felt like everything was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. You got your optimism a little bit back.
I did. And we just kept growing.
What year did you get hired to be the service guy?
So, 2001.
So
2001.
Like 4 years, you didn't feel very optimistic.
4 years, those were a tough 4 years. And if you ask your mother, she would tell you the same thing. It was tough. It was really tough. And then as that started, then I kind of found my niche as far as being able to talk to people and relate to people and kind of empathize with people because I was constantly talking to growers, but then we did open houses and we'd go to the World Pork Expo. The first World Pork Expo I went to for Claude was a whole different deal than when I would go up there when I was a lowly hog farmer because we went there and everybody knew who you were because we were one of the big players when it came to building hog buildings. And we all had that. We were all about the same age. Everybody that worked in there we were about the same age. I was actually a little bit older than the rest of them. But I still consider myself young, but we all had this attitude that it was us against everybody else. I mean, we were out to sell every building. if we knew about a hog building that was being built, we thought we were going to sell it.
Well, and that's a good mentality. That's a mentality to have.
And so when we went to those deals, we had a really good time. It was good.
And it grew you.
And it grew. It really did. It stretched me. And it was hard because I was on the road a lot and you guys were little and Mom had to burden a lot of that. But at least we were getting dug out of the hole we were in. We were making money. We were getting things back on track. And then I'd been doing that. I can't remember what year that was. I can't remember how many years I did that. Maybe I did that 7 or 8 years. And they had a salesman that left to start his own company. And I knew that if I was ever going to make the change that I had to do it. And I basically went in there and I sold Claude and Chris on the idea of me becoming a salesman. And I did. And when I became a salesman...
Well, just back up a little bit because you felt optimistic. You've talked to me about it. So you felt optimistic and everything you've done in your life leading up to that point, you were working on hog buildings, had association with hogs, so it's everything you learned. So you knew the in and outs of hog buildings just about as best as anyone could ever know. But you, like you said, so you got back to the place where you're optimistic, but Mom, you had us and you had Mom and you've been working, you're trying to get your way back up the mountain and you're finally like on the upward spiral.
Yep.
But you knew you were working long hours. Yeah.
So, one of our earlier barn talks, we talked about trading money for time, and that's what I was doing 100%. 100%.
Time
I was
for money.
Yeah, I was trading time for money, or money for time. However you want to do
whatever.
It. Because I was working. Well, basically, it was one of those things. If the water heater broke, I knew how many hours. I had to work.
Right.
And it wasn't, if I didn't work, I didn't get paid, nothing got done. And I knew that I didn't want that life. I knew that I wanted to get to a point where I had something that was at least going to give me something, whether I was there or not. And I honestly hadn't thought about doing a hog building because I knew that it had left such a bad, it was so devastating going through all that I just didn't feel like it was worth trying to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I became a salesman,
well, I'm just trying to tell you, I'm just trying to let them know what your mindset was when you went into that meeting to get the sales job.
Oh yeah.
Because you were, Mom was, let's be honest, Mom was fed up of how much hours you were working and we were little and she was carrying the load
on the home front. She was carrying
the load because you had to do what you were doing. She was doing what she had to do.
Yeah. So I knew when I went in there that I had to get that job because that was my chance to get a salary instead of an hourly position. And it was my chance to get a chance to make my own destiny, basically, because I knew that I could sell a building. I had been to enough open houses and I had watched Claude, I had watched Daryl, I had watched the other salesmen that they had. I had watched these guys and I knew, because I was on all sides of it, I knew why people wanted to build a hog building. I knew why they wanted to buy it. And that was the beautiful thing about it. So all we had to do was convince somebody that they wanted to have us build it. We didn't have to convince them that they needed it, that they had a reason for it. When they called us,
they were already interested in building one.
Yeah, they wanted it. They wanted what we were selling. We just had to convince them that what we had was better than what somebody else's had. So as a sales deal, that's pretty good.
That's a good product.
When you don't have to cold call and you don't have to prospect and you literally, all you have to do is convince people that your product's the best. You will take care of the pain that they have. That's what you had to do. And so I knew
at a high ticket price too, that also helps.
Well, and that's the other thing about it. I mean, so there was a lot riding on that and it was a huge relief. I remember it was a huge relief when they offered me that job And I was so proud. And that, that was the other part of it was I treated that company like it was mine. Like I had a vested interest in the profitability and the growth of PSI because I felt like a little piece of that was mine. And that's something, if you can get employees that feel that way,
if you
unstoppable.
establish a culture like that, it's pretty.
And that's how that culture was at that point. I mean, that's how it was. Everybody that worked there
wanted it to go to the moon.
They did, and they were fiercely loyal about it. Nobody slurred us. Nobody said anything. You took it personally if somebody said something crappy about it. And it was just, that's how it was. But when I started that, I spent a lot of time with Claude, and I'd really love to get him on. I want to get him on here and have him tell you his story because
it's crazy.
It's amazing. But it's so much about mindset, and he taught me so much about passive income.
Financial.
And he taught me, he's the one really that pushed me over the edge of just do it. Just do it, because it's not going to happen if you don't take the step. It's not going to happen. And instead of you sitting around thinking, what could be, you either need to know whether it will be or it won't be, but you're not going to know anything if you don't try. If you don't get off your ass and just do it. And one day we were going somewhere and he just said to me, he's like, "Are you ever going to build a building?" He goes, "How many acres you got out there?" And I told him, he's like, "Why aren't you doing this?" And I told him, about everything I'd been through. And he had been through financial problems way worse than what I had been on a grander scale. And he built that thing all the way back. He stayed in the same industry and, came all the way back, which is basically, what I was doing and just changed
everything.
So what I'll say is every one of us have people in our lives that we run into that maybe at the time you don't realize the value of that individual, but in hindsight, you realize how important that relationship was. And for me, that was one of the most important relationships that I had professionally. And the guy that I worked for after that, Dave Eichelberger, I would say the same thing about. Those are two individuals in my life that you can look at and you can learn a hell of a lot from.
Claude was your first real mentor outside of your dad.
Yeah.
Like that was, mentor's kind of a mainstream word now, but back then no one really called it that. But he really was your first mentor.
Yeah, and it was a change of mindset. Working there, selling buildings, being around that group of people, it changed the way I thought about what I wanted for my life. As far as it flipped me from being somebody that wanted to just put in my time and then come home and put my feet up and have a few beers and fall asleep in front of the TV and, I don't know, go duck hunting on the weekend. Nothing against duck hunters, but I don't, just it really lit a fire that kind of gotten extinguished through that period of time of the hog business. And then
the fire was relit.
Yeah, and so then the best sales pitch that I ever gave next to when I asked Trisha to marry me was me convincing my wife. Well, not only my wife, I had to convince my dad because he had to deed off the ground for me to be able to build it because I didn't actually own any of the ground. And boy, I didn't know if I could get that done. And I did. In 2010, I built that barn. And
your first hog building.
And it worked. And I was scared. We were scared, and we didn't know if it was going to work, and it did. When you're in it, it seems like it seems so big and it seems so hard, and it's just a lot of stress. And I got to say, the most pleasurable experience that I've had is building your barn.
Mm-hmm.
Because
it's kind of all the work that you you went through it yourself, but it was kind of enjoyable for you
This one was enjoyable
because you didn't feel.
Well, and I know, here, look at the way I look at it is hopefully I can give you and your brother some advice, some information that you can actually use so that you don't have to you're going to make mistakes. There's no doubt about it. But hopefully you don't have to make as bad of mistakes as I made. And the mistakes you do make are not severe enough that it takes you a decade to recover from them. Mm-hmm. And if you guys can do that, you're going to be a lot further ahead than I was. And, my dad did the best that he could with what he had. And for what he had and for as much technology and as much innovation that he...
And time.
Yeah, that he used, that he did. I mean, he did a lot, but it wasn't... There's just a lot of things that played into how I ended up. I'll go back. Here's a great story. So in 1992, when that farm that Gary Ledger had came up for sale, I was dating your mom. I was dating Trisha. And she's shirt tail relation to Dave Eichelberger. And we were at a dinner, and I knew who he was, but I didn't know him very well. And he knew my family. He probably knew my dad. He didn't really know me. But we had talked, and we were sitting at this table, and he literally said to me, and I think this was probably fall of 92 because this property was up for sale, and I can't remember exactly when I bought it, but right around that time. And he said to me...
This is before the crash.
This is...
92?
Yeah, this is before the crash.
3 years before the mild crash.
Yep. Hogs are real good. Hogs are real good. He says to me, he said, I don't know if I brought it up or he knew that I was looking at buying that, I think, or I might have told him or whatever. And he said, why don't you just go up on that farm that you guys bought and build a couple of buildings for me? You'll make way more money doing that than you will farrowing your own pit. Or he said, you'll be way better off doing that than buying those sows. And I mean, I'm giving you, I don't remember exactly, but that was the gist of it. And I looked at him like he was batshit crazy. And you remember, I'm 21. Yep, 92.
You're
I'm
my
21.
age.
So I'm pretty fucking smart. Sorry, but had to give that for emphasis. I'm pretty smart. And I said to him, I can make way more money farrowing my own pigs than feeding pigs for you. And in credit to him, he didn't, tell me to go jump in a lake or anything. He just smiled and he said, yep, you can. And he said, but it's not always going to be that way. He said, this thing is changing. And he said, it's gonna be different. And I didn't give it a second thought. And this is in 1992. And this was right when he was starting to have people build buildings for him, custom feed.
So he was a little bit ahead of the time.
He was a little bit ahead of the times. And if we could ever get him on here, I'd have him tell you that story because he's got a great story about seeing the hog business transition. But anyway, fast forward. From 1992 to 2010. 2010, I build my first 2,400 head contract finisher for Eichelberger Farms. And I go down to their office when they were at the old office. I walk in and the guy that's the head of their production, he's the guy that I talked to about doing it and getting the contract and all that. And I go see him and I'm like, you got that contract? I want to get it signed because the bank needs a copy of it. And he said, yeah, he goes, I do, but he goes, Dave wants to see you. I think he's got it. He wanted to ask you something. And I'm like, okay. And I should back up. When I worked at PSI, we built a lot of buildings for them. So I had a good relationship. At this point, I'd done a lot of business with them, and I knew Dave, and I knew all of them. So, I mean, it wasn't thrown off at all. I thought, maybe he wants to talk about a project or something he's thinking about doing. I go down there, and he has this contract, and he slides it over there, and he just looks at me and he goes, Didn't we talk about doing this once? And he just kind of smiles, and I just nod my head, and I signed the contract, and they made a copy of it. But so there you go. Hindsight is a powerful thing, because there is a point there. So my life could have been totally different, and I'll never know. And it's like you talk about how Gary Vee says, you never know what could be for the decisions you made. But in 1992, it is possible that I could have decided to not buy that farrow to finish, and we could have gone up on that farm that we bought, and we could have built 2 contract finishers for about $125 a pig space, which Claude Greiner probably would have built. He was building them back then, and they would have paid off in about 7 years. I don't know where I would have lived. I don't know, and I don't know if I would have met Trisha, and I was dating her, but I don't know. Who knows what would have happened? And so you can look at that and say, that was probably a mistake. Well, it probably was a mistake. But then the flip side of it is, if I would have done that, I guarantee you I would have never struggled as much. I wouldn't have learned everything I learned. I sure would have never become a salesman. I would have never met the people that I've met. I probably would have not ended up making it all the way back to working for Eichelberger's before I came home. There's just so much that I've accomplished and learned that I wouldn't have learned if I would have made that decision.
You wouldn't trade it for anything.
No. I say that. For all of the good and all the bad, you can't say that. You can't say, yeah, I should have done that, because you don't know what would have happened.
Right.
I mean, it very well could have.
You could have done that and started making a lot of money, and then you could have went on a plane, and that plane could have crashed, and you could have died.
Oh yeah, well heck yes, that's for sure.
What if that? That's the thing. You could have made the right decision there.
Yeah.
But you would have ended up dying before you became 50 years old.
And when I was 7 years old, we were unloading corn out in the bin right outside this barn, and I was playing in the wagon. My dad always chewed my butt about get out of the wagon, and I didn't listen to him. And he walked over to our gestation building to look at something, and in the process, in that amount of time, I got sucked down as the corn was sliding out of the gravity box. It pulled me to the bottom. I don't know how. I was little, but anyway, I almost suffocated, and the corn was up over my head, and my dad came back. And I'll never forget this, because I was scared to death, and he pulled me out of the wagon, got me up out of the corn, and then he proceeded to beat my ass because I was stupid. And he got me out, and he sent me over to the house and told me, I could have been dead right there. Right. So there's so many things that happen in your life. There's so many.
So get back on track. You built your first hog building in 2010, and that was another pivotal moment, not just for you, but for me and our whole family and our generation as our family farm. I mean, that if Dad wouldn't have built his building in 2010, we would not be here doing what we're doing right now. I wouldn't have never farmed. We probably would have rented out the ground. This Will Do Farm would not have been a thing.
No, it wouldn't have been, without a doubt, because that was at that point, my dad was getting to where I helped him do everything as far as putting in the crop and taking it out. And when I was doing service, it was really hard because I didn't have the time. And when I became a salesman, then it also gave me time that I could do I could do a heck of a lot of work from my phone. And, as it grew from my computer and all of that stuff to where I was able to help, there was a couple years in there where he had actually rented out part of his ground just because he only wanted to do a little bit of it. Mm-hmm. And we were able to do it all, so we just went back to farming ourselves, and then we got the manure out of that first shed. And because I had my income from being a salesman, I didn't really need to take anything out of that building, so I was able to put everything back into it. And then it didn't take very long, and I decided that, well, I might as well build another one. And so in 2015.
So you got that. You got a better taste in your mouth now.
Yeah.
The hog building worked.
Well, it worked. And then I had met so many people that had multiple buildings that were making hog buildings as real estate to give them passive income and to shelter money they were making other places through the depreciation of the buildings.
Yep.
You know, they were putting these sheds up. You knew it worked. I knew it worked. I knew it worked, and I knew that I could make it work for this farm. And I knew that the only way that we were going to stay viable for a 400-acre farm was to have more hog sheds. It was the only way you could make it work because land prices were going up. There was no way I was going to go buy a farm. It just wouldn't work. But I could make a hog building work. And the thing was, I was making money. I was making good money selling to where the building just had the cash flow and all the extra money I could put back into it. And that made it work even better, even as the prices started going up. Because from the first building to your building, they've gone up
significantly.
$200,000?
Yep.
For a site, from what the first one cost the last one. And so
you just kept going.
I just kept going. And then we talked about, I kind of became, success is addicting, but then I think I kind of just became a person that I didn't like because I was so driven on getting the next sale. And then the other thing I hated was I got to the end of the year and I had to start over, and it was just, I had this mountain to climb. And Claude sold the company, and
the same guys weren't working there.
Yeah, everybody had moved on.
The culture wasn't the same as when you started it.
They gotten bigger, which they had to get bigger, but the culture had changed. And let's be honest, I'm not a detail person. And if you ask them today, the customer responsibility list that they give people that they have to sign, there's items in there today that weren't in there when I had it. And the reason they're in there is because of me, because my number one priority was to sell the building, and I didn't really care about the details. If there was something that I needed to do or something I needed to give, if it was going to cost the company $500 here, $500 there, I didn't really care because I just wanted to get it sold. And there's nothing wrong with that, but when you get to where you're building the number of buildings they were building, trying to keep all those little details straight that some salesman had probably scratched down in the margin of the final costing page, you got to do a better job than that. So, the business had changed, and I wasn't wanting to go that direction. So, and then the other thing was, I felt like there was something bigger out there that I wanted to do.
Well, and did you get hope back into the farm?
Yeah, 100%. I knew I had to do more, and I had to do more because at that point, both my parents were elderly, and I needed to be able to be here and check on them and take care of both my brothers live quite a distance away. And so there was just stuff that needed to be done. And, I wanted a little slower pace as far as I didn't want to be far from home. I didn't want to be down in Missouri. I didn't want to be up in the Dakotas. I wanted to be close to home. And so the opportunity came, and I took a pay cut to leave there. I did. But I was okay with it because I knew I had residual income coming from these sheds. I knew they were going to get paid for, and it was the right decision to do. And I wouldn't change that either. And then, I built the third building. And so then it's just a time thing. I knew that my kids were growing up and they were going to make their own way. And so I wasn't going to have to support that side. And it was just Trish and I, and she had her own things that she put a lot of stuff on hold while I was doing all the stuff that I had to do to get this family raised. And so, I wanted more time for us, and it worked out. And it's still working out. I don't want anybody to think that we're not busy. I feel like we're busier now than we ever are, but we're busy doing our own stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm more optimistic now than I was
Ever.
well, even 2 years ago, because what we're doing right here, I have met so many people and made so many connections that I would have never made.
Right.
I mean, it's just like when I became when I went to PSI.
This is a pivotal moment.
It is a pivotal moment. It really is. And we're going to have to make this work for this farm to stay relevant for another generation. We've got to.
Right.
Because the sad truth is, no matter what business you're in, if you're not growing that business a little bit, you're going backwards because the money's worth less and the costs go up, and every generation that you add, there's going to be more mouths to feed. I don't know how much time we have before there's more mouths to feed, but it's coming. I have a feeling it's coming one of these days. So we got to keep going.
Yeah.
But I guess I'll close with this. I'm 50 years old. I don't feel 50 years old, and I'm sure if you asked my dad when he's 99 years old that he didn't feel like he was 99. I bet some days he felt pretty old, but there is so much opportunity out there, and I've learned a lot in the last 6 months. I've learned a lot more than I have in the last 4 years probably, and I'm going to have to keep learning. And I think that's the other thing. If you get to the point where you don't feel like you want to spend the time to learn anything new, or you don't like what things look like, and you feel like you want to resist that or go the other way or crawl up in a ball, it's not going to stop. And you might as well embrace it and find a way to prosper from it.
Yeah, you got to change the times. But yeah, I mean, you made that was kind of Dad's life story right there. I mean,
It's kind of long.
It was long. That was definitely a long episode, but it's the ultimate Tork talk. That's what we're going to call this episode, because we do little Tork talks on our Instagram and stuff, and it's kind of a funny thing to say because, there's TED Talk out there, but we have the Tork himself, so I changed the name to Tork Talk. But this is the ultimate Tork talk of his life story and how he did things. But I feel like it was all meant to be. I feel like you wouldn't want it any other way, because it ultimately led us to be able to farm together, and now we're working together to make this farm and our family making the farm viable for another generation. I mean, that's both our goals. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe you should read that card now. I think it'll be a good way to close.
All right.
I got really good in the feels in this one, so you can read it out loud. But this might be a really good way to close the episode. I mean, there's a lot of, yeah. I mean, it's my dad, so I think very highly of him and all the sacrifice he had to make for our family to get to where we are, and the work he put in, and to help. If he wouldn't have done what he did, this farm wouldn't be a thing. I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't even be here. So, kind of means a lot to me.
Okay, the bar is pretty high.
Yeah.
So, happy birthday to the best dad ever.
Yeah, the card was we got a Walmart card, so
it's good that Sawyer and I have the same handwriting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I hope you can read my handwriting.
Happy birthday to truly the greatest dad ever. It doesn't seem possible that you're turning 50. We remember being kids, riding on your lap and mowing and playing Halo 3. Halo 3, best video game ever, arguably.
Yeah, no, it is.
With you like it was yesterday. I know that back then you didn't think we would probably amount to much. That's not true. With spending all our time playing video games, yeah, I did think that was kind of excessive. But seeing your sacrifice and work ethic for the betterment of our family is ultimately what set the example for what a man is supposed to be. We're so very blessed to have a dad and a best friend like you that drops everything to help us out with whatever we need. A true family man that supports our crazy ideas, any crazy ideas we have, any crazy ideas we come up with, and doesn't make us feel crazy thinking that way. That the biggest hype man, no matter how big or small the accomplishment. Anytime I feel overwhelmed or discouraged, you always find a way to lift me up again and keep me moving forward.
Yeah.
I truly would be lost without you in my life. The guidance and example you set for the men in our family will carry on for generations. The lessons you've taught us is better than any lessons I've learned from a book or an online guru. I hope that one day I can become at least half the man/dad that you are to my kids, and you will. Thank you for everything you've done and continue to do for us. It's only halftime, at least. So many years to go, which is good. We still have a lot to do. I still have a lot to learn from you, and we are just getting started.
You got it back.
Oh, geez.
I filled it out.
When it's all said and done, I think Tork Whistler will be the greatest generation. That's fine with me because I already think you are. We're so proud to be your sons. Happy deep thoughts. Happy birthday. Or hashtag deep thoughts. We love you, Clanswear. Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And you guys will be.
Yep. But, I mean, yeah, it's my dad. Ultimate sacrifice. None of it would have been possible without him. And that road right there, that journey right there, yeah, none of this would be possible without it. So all that was a crapshoot of, you had some crappy times in that journey, but I'm sure glad that you did it. I'm sure glad that you did it.
I'm glad we did too. I'm glad we stuck it out. And if Mom was here, she would say the same thing. It was hard. And it was hard on all of us, but we're glad we stuck it through. And that's everybody. You know what? Everybody has that story. Everybody's story is different. But the truth is, if you just keep grinding, you'll get through it and better days are ahead. But you just got to put in the work. And
keep your nose on the grindstone. And
yep.
I know this was a long one, guys. I really do. But happy freaking birthday.
Thank you.
Happy 50th birthday. Tell Dad happy birthday in the comments. Let us know who you want to see on the show in the future. And
we're getting close on getting guests.
Yeah, we're getting close. So have a good rest of the week, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.